Okay, and the last speaker for today's conference is Jeremy Myerson. He's the director and chair of the Hamlin Centre for Design at the Royal College of Art in London. And he will stress the fact that we need to pay more attention to psychological comfort and not just only physical and functional comfort in the workplace. Jeremy Myerson.
Okay, so punch drunk, weary. I think we've heard an enormous amount today from a great many speakers, and obviously the task of the person who goes last is to find something new to say or synthesize what's already been said. But I want to kind of pull us back a bit. I'd like to pull us back to, we've had a lot of discussion, Eric and colleagues have pushed on into a world where we don't have offices and we don't go every day to spaces, we're going to satellite areas, and yes, there will probably be less real estate, but the reality is for most companies is that they have a lot of office space and they can't afford to move and they can't afford to reprogram, and they want to tune up their space, they want to reprogram it as best they can. So what I'm going to do is just show you a couple of current projects that we're working on that allow you to do that. And in a sense, this is I'm not going to talk about technology, I'm going to talk about space and how you design space and some of the ways in which, some of the strategies which you could adopt. Just a little bit about the Royal College of Art. It was very nice for Marie to present that. It's nice to sit back and have your own project presented by somebody else very professionally. We're the largest research centre in the Royal College of Art, which is the world's longest running design school, art and design school. We were founded exactly 175 years ago by the British government. We were called the Government School of Design. They were very worried about French silk and Prussian exports. So what's changed? And we're an entirely postgraduate institution, and the Helen Hamlin Centre for Design is one of the college's longest running research centres, and Marie talked a little bit about what we do. Our modus operandi is every year we employ a dozen RCA graduates or thereabouts in a whole range of disciplines. We have architects and designers and engineers and textile, vehicle, product design, furniture design, and these are the people that actually do the research. I want to, if I've got a simple message just to leave you with this afternoon, it's about pushing on to the upper levels of comfort in terms of office design, in the same way that technology is moving beyond the merely functional. Jacqueline Vischer is a Canadian psychologist who I'm sure many of you will have heard of, and her comfort model is something that we use a lot in the Helen Hamlin Centre for Design. Basically, she identified 3 levels of comfort in office buildings. The first level is physical comfort, and most buildings nowadays easily cross what we call the habitability threshold. There are very few buildings which are boiling hot or freezing cold, or if you walk down a corridor, you'll get your eye poked out, or incredibly noisy. Most buildings meet that threshold in terms of lighting, ventilation, temperature, and so on. You can see what you're doing. And then there's the next level, which is functional comfort, and that's where most workplace design has been aimed. And earlier today we talked a lot about ergonomics and visual comfort, thermal comfort, indoor air quality, and this is so that the environment supports the tasks that you have to do. You can concentrate on the task and not fight an adverse environment. And more organisations, in the way they plan their space and put in facilities and technical infrastructure, they are making buildings that are functionally comfort, in that they help you create and make your tasks, as well as physical comfort. But the top level is the most interesting of all, and this is the uncharted part of office design, and this is psychological comfort. So this is comfort in terms of understanding individual aspiration and motivation, our sense of belonging, our sense of identity, whether it's a group or organization. And these psychosocial factors are often overlooked. And it's very interesting that in the UK, more days are now being lost through stress and mental health issues to do with disaffection and low mood and so on, than they are to do with the traditional physical ailments of musculoskeletal and so on and so forth. So this is the backdrop, this idea of searching for psychological comfort. It seems that ergonomics by itself is not going to do it, and just planning a functional, well-organized workplace is not enough, and we really need to push on into understanding what actually motivates people and gives them the kinds of intrinsic self-worth that other speakers have spoken about today. So I'm going to show you two projects. The first is a collaboration with the furniture company Haworth called Living Stages, in which we asked ourselves, what can the workplace learn from theatre design? Because when we go to the theatre, it doesn't look like that. The theatre is a place where our emotions are manipulated, moods are conveyed quickly, it's a sense of time passing is explored, and it's very, very interesting how the theatrical experience appeals to our psychological well-being. Offices, on the other hand, we have refined a way of working which is completely about lean working. It's about functional comfort. Here is a well-designed office, which many psychologists would describe as psychologically impoverished. So when we try and put colour and drama and narrative into our offices, they are often designed in ways which are very expensive, one-offs, hard to replicate. Like this is Quicksilver's headquarters, which is designed to resemble the boardwalk or a beachfront. And we all know that if you put an animal in an empty cage, they will go mad very quickly. But we persist in doing the same thing to humans. And why are we going mad? And interesting experiment by the British psychologist Craig Knight. And he set a group of workers a series of written tasks. And first of all, they had to do it in a lean environment, a room that looks like this with no adornment. Then they were given a room that was enriched with pictures of plants and actual plants, and flowers. And then they were given plants and photographs and asked to arrange the room themselves. And what happened was that productivity went up from the lean to the enriched to the empowered office, and errors went down. People's control over their own psychologically enriched environment and empowered environment meant that they worked better. So we looked at theatre design. How does it work? How could it help? And we studied particularly the early era of modernist theatre design, end of the 19th century, when maximum means minimum effect to create mood and drama, a sense of occasion. And we looked in particular at two pioneers, European pioneers of the modern stage, Edward Gordon Craig and Edward Appiah, who actually didn't know each other until they were old men, but they were working in the same vein. And we identified the kinds of elements in theatre design that you find in offices, but used in a totally different way. So light and shadow, that both were pioneers of using light and shadow. Levels, Gordon Craig used levels a lot in his work. Projection and effects, this is work by Swoboda, a Polish director. And screens, used bureaucratically in offices, but in the theatre, very dramatic part of the action. and very malleable. And of course, colour, used in the theatre in an incredibly effective way. And vista, framing, perspective, very, very important. And out of this, we developed a kit of parts, if you like. We were trying to create a very simple set of elements, a vocabulary of theatre design that could be applied to the office. So light and shadow, directional light, top lit, side lit, and backlit. Effects, patterns, shadow, and wash. Levels, regular steps, irregular ramps, and podia. Projection and effects, a backdrop, accent, transform, and reveal. And of course, what we were doing was finding the precedents in theatre and looking at the evidence that have been archived and seeing how these things are done. Screens, movable screens, top-hung screens, malleable screens, and static or scenic screens. Colour, graphic, saturate, layer, and wash, and you begin to recognise that some of these strategies that are used in office design. And finally, vista, creating an expanse or a perspective or framing the action or creating depth using scrims or gauzes. So out of this, we created this family of effects. And there are 26 elements in all. It begins to take the more artistic side of office design, but present it like the components of an office furniture piece. And then we tested the whole principle with architects and designers. We ran a series of workshops in New York and also in London at Clerkenwell Design Week. And more than 60 design professionals took part in the workshops. They were given the kit of parts and they were asked to see how they could work with them. And it was very, very interesting what people produced. And a lot of themes came out of it. The drive towards natural materials, towards permeability or translucency, more ambiguity in the workplace, less lean working, more psychological enrichment. And we began to study well-known schemes and almost kind of reverse engineer our kit of parts into the space. This is a concentration space in Macquarie, and you can see the use of light, the use of saturate red colour. This is a place to concentrate. It looks very different from the rest of the office, and the framing of this concentration space. This is BBC Media Centre with top-hung screens, top-lit lighting, and again saturate colour to create a particular effect. And we then began to do our own experiments. So here's a typical open plan office, and you're trying to get people to concentrate. We've put in a framing device, and of course a wash and top-hung screens that create a very, very different effect. And this work is ongoing. We've now involved Philips Lighting, and we're working with them. And it's all part of an attempt to actually create offices that are much more psychologically enriched and giving people, especially with lighting and projection effects, local control, so it's psychologically empowering. So the second project is called Workscapes, and this is by Benjamin Kozlowski, and we worked with 4 partners. We worked with the Bossons Group, the lead partner was GlaxoSmithKline, we worked with Herman Miller, and we worked with the acoustics experts, Plantronics. And we came together as a consortium, and here the driving analogous environment was not the stage set, but was urban planning, and particular aspects of urban planning that could be transposed to an office environment in order to retune or reprogram it. So this is La Villette in Paris. It was built, it's a science park that was built in 1982, and we looked in particular at 2 schemes, one by Bernard Schumi, which was the scheme that was actually built. This is a giant park, and also OMA, the Office of Metropolitan Architecture. And we took elements of both schemes and we created a kind of a program, if you like, with 4 elements. Programmable surfaces, large objects, points of interaction, and circulation. So, you know, the large programmable surfaces, you can program them in different ways, a meeting space or an office desk space or breakout or whatever. The large objects, and we see them around, game zones, small structures, art installations, recognisable landmarks. And then the points of interaction that members of staff can put themselves, from planting to coffee machines to print hubs, water coolers, and so on. And finally, circulation. Is it simply functional, or do you create meandering or perimeter or arterial types of circulation? And again, we created this kit of parts, this series of design elements. What was interesting is that we did a lot of user research in 3 types of organisation who typically inhabit very different types of office building in London. So we looked at the creative agency, typically 60, 70 people, who will inhabit old warehouse space on the city fringe, cheap warehouse space which they will convert in historic buildings. We looked at the kind of international business consultancy, typically in post-war purpose-built offices close to major railway stations around Waterloo or Paddington Station or King's Cross. And we looked at the global corporation, the out-of-town global communications company on its own campus. And obviously Glaxo were particularly interested in looking at this built condition because of their own need to rethink their own real estate. We took a whole group of users in each of these organizations through a user research process with in-depth interviews with maps and stickers to ask them about their tasks, their work tools, their culture, and so on. And we then had a marking system from low to high, from 1 to 6, for each of the building type and each of the organizational type. So, for example, we looked at things like face-to-face communication, which was very high in the small networked creative agency, but very, very low in the business consulting organization where people were out, and kind of in the middle in the global communications company. And of course, we built up data sets for all of these areas, communication, collaboration, and different forms of social interaction in and out of the building, patterns of work, temporal and remote, varieties of setting and mobility, and so on. And the whole study is available if you'd like to have a look at it. What was interesting is that we had user data which gave us the issues around the buildings that needed, the spaces that needed programming, and we had the Workscapes kit of parts, the elements that could be applied. And I'll just show you how that might be. So here is a drawing of a typical floor of the international business consulting firm, which scored incredibly lowly in terms of collaboration, communication, social interaction, mobility, very, very lowly, very low levels of satisfaction. And you look at it and you think, well, that's a well-designed, well-organized, lean working environment. But when you look at it forensically using our system, you can see what the problem is. The programmable spaces are absolutely huge and unvariated. There are no landmarks at all. There are hardly any social points of interaction. And the circulation is absolutely functional, and it doesn't connect large elements of the floor plate to each other. So, using our system, we break down and rebuild the program, and we break down the large programmable spaces and reprogram them. We have much more interesting circulation. We put in some large landmarks, and we put in lots of points of local interaction. And that's what the space begins to look like. So the space is exactly the same in terms of the number of people to go into it and the space available, but it has been completely reanimated so that when you go into the office, it's more of an experience. It's more psychologically enriched and more psychologically empowering. And we've now been asked to use this methodology on a very large Scottish teaching hospital, just 3 years old, where they've got huge problems of disassociation and low mood amongst staff and problems with the building, and they think it's a programmable interior space issue. So that's the, in a nutshell, that's the work we're working on. We believe absolutely that psychological comfort is the next big thing in office design, and we really need the tools and techniques and research methodologies to make it happen. Thank you very much.